This is my favorite sweater, and until recently, I didn't care that it was made out of some synthetic material. Polyester, polyester, polyester. You know, my whole closet is now filled with polyester clothing. It didn't used to be this way. It's been a new phenomenon in which my clothing is primarily made out of synthetic materials. The fact is, humans require clothing, not just for modesty's sake, but also for protection against the built environment. But can clothing actually be bad for your health? This story is not only about fast fashion and the degradation of quality in clothing, but it also has much to do with environmental pollution, forever chemicals, air pollution, as well as water quality. All of these things are terrible for our health, and we need to be really conscious of this, because if we don't get a grip on our clothing consumption, it might have devastating effects for our health in the future. Let's talk about issue number one, and that is microplastics. Let's take our athletic clothes, for instance. Spandex and polyester, nylon and polyester, nylon. Now, I love leggings so very much. They are comfortable, they're stretchy, I can sit all day in them and not worry about anything tearing. When polyester, nylon, or other synthetic fibers shed, the issue is that they create this thing called microplastics. And now you may have heard about microplastics all over the news lately because this is a hot topic issue. But microplastics are so understudied, and we just don't understand how bad they are for our health. In a recent article, researchers found that an increase in microplastics can be found in the cardiovascular system. This microplastic buildup actually led to coronary issues, so heart issues. And because it's so understudied, we don't really fully know the health consequences of what polyester does to our health long term. I don't know if you know this, but fossil fuels are what creates polyester. Polyester is a man-made material. It comes from plastic derivatives, and these fibers are spun into clothing. The fashion industry as a whole is responsible for a whole lot of pollution. According to some research, it's estimated that 12% of pollution comes from the fashion industry. And the reason why is because we're just collecting more and more clothes overall. But how does having more clothing and buying more clothing cause pollution? Because when we buy more products are produced. And when more products are produced, we introduce more pollution into the environment because of the cycle of fashion. The fashion industry is incentivized to keep you buying more and more clothes. It's known as economies of scale. Economies of scale are the reason why the fashion industry is producing so much volume of clothing. So, according to Google, economies of scale is a microeconomic concept that describes the cost advantages and business gains as it increases its scales of operation. This means that as a business expands, the average cost of producing each unit decreases. So yeah, fashion industries as a whole are incentivized to keep selling you stuff, make more of it, and reduce costs overall. They are making wild amounts of money. Meanwhile, we're suffering the consequences. Air pollution is so much worse in developing countries and communities that are marginalized that is one of the issues with development of fast fashion. It's literally making it harder to breathe. Now, let's talk about water pollution. Have you ever wondered why you can get the vibrant colors that you do from fabric? The reason why we can get such vivid colors in our clothing is because of the dyes that we use. But the issue with dyes run off into water, and that water then becomes polluted. Textiles also use a ton of water to create. It's not just the process of the dyes and runoff from the environment that's causing water to be polluted. It's also the pure amount of consumption of water that people use. And this wouldn't be a problem if people weren't buying massive amounts of clothing and then just dumping them in a landfill. Because when the clothing degrades or attempts to degrade, I mean, synthetic materials don't really degrade that well, but the runoff from the fabric and from the landfills down into our drinking water does impact our health. In fact, fast fashion has become so ubiquitous with clothing waste that people only wear styles for 1 or 2 before they toss it out. The thing is that fashion is so expensive that we just can't reduce the amount of clothing that we're buying. We're churning through our money, but it's not really feasible to do anything else. Researchers suggest that the fashion industry uses 79 trillion liters of water every year for clothing production. This doesn't include the amount of water that we use to wash our clothing. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, fast fashion isn't regulated, and this can have devastating effects on people. Take, for instance, flight attendant uniforms at a major airline company. Now, these new attendant uniforms started to cause some issues with some of the flight attendants, such as brain fog, migraines, coughing, heart palpitations, as well as a whole host of other issues. Technology has led us to be able to create so many products that are beneficial for the world. Stain resistant, you're probably thinking that's not that big a deal, but it uses chemicals, and some of these chemicals are known to cause health complications. What these flight attendants found out is that these uniforms were being made out of arsenic, cobalt, lead. These are all known to be impactful to human health. We're creating a whole lot of health issues by wearing our clothes. That's not terrifying. We wear clothing day in and day out. And the thing is that there are so many chemicals we don't even know about that are being used in our clothing. It wasn't until these flight attendants reported that they were having health consequences after the new uniforms were issued that they really started to think, maybe there are dangerous chemicals in these uniforms. The reason this is terrifying is because the chemicals that produce our clothes, we're wearing those on our body physically. They're in contact with the largest organ on our body, which is our skin. There needs to be more research about what we're putting on our skin and what chemicals clothing has in it for not only our own health, but for society overall. And what happens when you mix chemicals and you don't know how they react? And just like you shouldn't mix two chemicals at home together without knowing how they react, you really shouldn't mix two chemicals in your clothing. It's not that chemicals are bad per se, and we really don't know how all chemicals react on our body, but that's the thing, we don't know, so we need more research. A few years ago, it came out that BPAs were bad for our hormones. It created hormone disruption, and thus I only use metal water bottles. But the BPAs are still in our clothing, so we need to be extra conscious of the stuff that we wear. Oh yeah, and PFAS are now in your clothing as well. That water repellent slicker that you wear, or that rain jacket that prevents the rain from seeping through you, that's made out of PFAS, which is the main reason why I've gotten rid of all my nonstick skillets, because PFAS have been shown to have some really scary consequences for using them. And so I don't cook with them and I don't want to wear them. So honestly, what do we do about this, and how can we go about having more ethically sourced clothing and just clothing in general that's safer to wear? Because there are some ways. There's a lot of greenwashing within the fashion industry. And it turns out that only less than 1% of clothing is made from recycled material. So those drop-offs that you see to recycle your textiles actually aren't being recycled. So a lot of this material that's being recycled is actually going to landfills. And if this cycle continues between 2015 and 2050, 22 million tons of microplastics will enter the water supply. The first thing is we can source our clothes more sustainably. So by this, I mean you're buying secondhand. A lot of what we can do is recycle what we have. We can go through our closets, look through them, trade with our friends. We can buy used items, and this helps reduce the amount of clothing that goes into landfills. The second thing we can do is we can wash our clothing less. I'm not proposing that you should not wash your clothing, because that is absolutely disgusting. But if you have a pair of jeans, for instance, you don't need to wash them after every wear. Also, using the dryer less is one of the ways to reduce the amount of energy, the consumption that you're using while wearing all these textiles. That can really help. Line drying, air drying, these are all things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint and thus help reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are burned. You can use efficient washing machines, which use less water and less energy, and that also helps reduce the amount of air pollution that you're using while wearing all these clothing. I know this is really hard, but try to avoid dry cleaning your clothes if you can. Now, things like blazers, suits, those are not going to be easy to hand wash, and you really should not do that. That is very bad. But if you can help reduce the amount of dry cleaning that you use, that'll also help the environment. When you're buying clothing, this is hard for people that don't have a lot of money or who want to increase their wardrobe and want the latest trends, but again, can't really afford to. It's going to be hard, but you should probably prioritize using natural materials. By this, I mean wool, linen, cotton, cashmere, things like this. And if you really don't want to do this, just try to find a percentage that is much lower than acrylic. If it's 100% acrylic, maybe don't buy that item. But if it's only 10% acrylic and 90% cotton or wool or whatever, that's going to be a better choice. It's going to wear longer. It's going to be more sustainable for the environment. Cotton is bad for the environment. It uses a ton of pesticides. It uses a lot of wastewater, and it just is really taxing to produce. But if you buy natural quality materials, they're going to last significantly longer. This means your clothing could last for decades rather than a couple wears. And that's ultimately going to save you a lot more money and be better for your health. You can also buy from fair trade and sustainable clothing brands, and these are going to ensure that you have better quality, better sustainable pieces in your wardrobe that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily get. And in general, I try to avoid fast fashion brands and ultra fast fashion brands because they're just not good quality and they're going to fall apart very quickly. When you're looking for companies to shop with, there are a couple things in mind that you want to focus on. One of these are labels such as Blue Sign, Okotex, or GOTS. These companies have great reputations and are also known for less use of chemicals in their products. I also avoid fancy promises like anti-stain resistant, anti-wrinkle, things of this nature, because it means that there might be chemicals in it or there might be more synthetic materials that I just don't want on my skin. And another thing you might want to consider is washing your clothing before you wear it. Now, this seems a little bizarre. Why would I do that? But it can wash away some of the chemicals that are in our clothing. So for instance, jeans use a lot of dye, and that dye may have chemicals in it that we just don't want on our bodies. A lot of times when you do the first washing for your pair of jeans, it can lead to a lot of this runoff from the dye. You don't want that on your skin necessarily, so it's a good practice to just throw your clothes in the wash before you wear them. One new promising development is that secondhand and thrifting and upcycling is now becoming a huge player in the fashion industry. In fact, these companies are expected to grow by 2028 to a $350 billion industry. That's great for the environment and it's great for consumers. And you can often get really nice pieces for a significant reduction in price. The thing is that this really shouldn't all fall on the consumer. In fact, not a lot of it should fall on the consumer at all. Sure, you should probably be buying less fast fashion and you should probably be buying less fashion overall, but that's not really a feasible solution. Trade policies and regulations will ultimately pave the way for a more healthy and sustainable future. But if we don't advocate for these things from elected officials and from the companies themselves, we really can't expect to see a difference. And so if you're not concerned about pollution, the environment, that's fine. But you should probably be concerned about the clothing that you're putting on your skin. I feel like if you focus on the things that you can change, ultimately, it'll lead you to a better place. But you shouldn't freak out too much. It's like when I found out that microplastics were in everything that we have that's plastic, I freaked out and got rid of like 90% of my plastic, except for my plastic containers, which will soon be going. But this is a gross exaggeration of what we should be doing. If you like the clothes that you're wearing and you're wearing them a lot, continue wearing them. That's good for the environment and it's good for a reduction in pollution. But if you're feeling like you need some more pieces added to your wardrobe, try to start incorporating natural materials in. Try to take better care of your clothes so that they last longer. Learn how to mend your clothing so when it needs repairs, like a button fell off, you can easily fix that, put it back on, and continue wearing it. This will be a more sustainable option. And if you don't know how to do that, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there that you can use. And if you really don't want to do that, which fair, totally 100% get, you can take it to a tailor. And with that, I leave you with a ton of information to think on. And as always, the sources are linked in the description. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. It would be doing me a huge favor. Thank you. Bye.